Indirect taxes are an unavoidable reality for businesses worldwide. What's needed is a tax calculation engine that is rapid, easy to use, and that adapts to tax laws as they change. It's a tall order, but a new Market Pulse report by Foundry shows that third party, cloud based indirect tax solutions are equal to the challenge. Hi, I'm Stan Gibson for CIO Marketing Services, and I'll be your host and moderator for this video webcast sponsored by Vertex. Joining me to take a close look at what's happening in the realm of indirect taxes and how you can best comply with a complex and frequently changing set of rules are two experts. David Reed, Director of Sales Engineering at Vertex. Welcome, David. Great to have you here for this webcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
And Vince Marasco, Director of Product Management for Tax Determination at Vertex. Welcome, Vince. Glad you could be with us today.
Happy to be here, Stan.
Before we dive into our discussion, just a quick word to members of our audience. Now, you can find additional information on today's topic in the resources area of your webcast player, so we do encourage you to take a look there at any time. To begin, David and Vince, let's review what we mean by indirect taxes. Which taxes are we talking about, and where and how are they applied?
Absolutely. So really, when you're looking at indirect taxes, there are a couple of them out there globally. You've got what we have in the US, which is our US focus for right now. We're going to be looking at indirect taxes. These are taxes which you would typically pay when you're buying goods or services in the US, and they tend to vary state by state. So over here, what you're buying when you apply tax to it, there could be potentially 12,000 different jurisdictions where each one of them will be getting a little bit of a percentage as a transaction basically goes through. Now, it will depend on which state, which ones will be applied, but this can really grow to be very complex. Similarly speaking, for the rest of the world that uses VAT, it is also a bit of a difficult system to go and find out. The rate might seem very easy, but there are different things which determine whether or not you're going to be paying the standard rate, a sort of a limited rate on there, or you've got an exemption for that particular product. So these are really the taxes which get applied to your goods and services as you do the purchasing.
Vince, is that accurate in your view?
Well, I mean, I think Dave hit the nail on the head in terms of what those taxes are. When you think about it, the complexity really does come into play in understanding which rules to apply to a transaction and which jurisdictions are in effect for a transaction. So in the United States in particular, there's a tremendous amount of product complexity. It's not so simple. It's not like everything's just taxed as tangible personal property with a simple rate. And those rates change depending on the jurisdiction. And there's state, local, city, townships. There's a ton of jurisdictional complexity in addition to the product complexity. And that's where a solution like an indirect tax engine really comes into play to help you manage all of that complexity at both the product level as well as at the jurisdictional level. And I think if you look at outside of the United States, there's a ton of conditions that can affect when something's taxed at a standard rate or a reduced rate or a luxury rate or a zero rate. And so keeping track of all of that is actually relatively complex outside of the United States. And then making sure that you record that correctly for your downstream filing with the taxing authority is another huge pain point that can really become challenging to manage from an indirect tax perspective.
Vince, looking at the Foundry Market Pulse survey results, we find that organizations have an average of 4 systems that require an indirect tax calculation. Does that number agree with your experience?
It does when you look at it, but it does in the sense that I would say it's a jumping off point. Most organizations, they're using some back office financial system like an ERP. There are e-commerce systems that they're using to actually take business over the internet. There's procurement systems that they're using that are specialty and really organized around actually buying goods or services from third-party vendors. So that's just to name a few that are very frequently in play at almost every organization now. And then you start to have bigger, more complex situations where you've got multiple ERPs in play because it's a global multinational that's got multiple operating companies underneath it. But yeah, there's oftentimes at least 4 systems. And then if you look at brick and mortar retail like POS, you can have multiple systems happening at local stores, really managing transactions and tax. So yeah, that number rings true. And I'd say it's probably in this day and age a little bit on the low end in terms of the number of systems that are managing transactions and managing tax. David, any thoughts that you have on that?
David, you agree that might be a little on the low side?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, 4 is pretty much what we're seeing as standard now, even from some of the lower corporate or even SMB markets. Everyone is typically going for the best of breed software now. So when you're looking at things like procurement solutions, these do have to have some references to tax because the tax team members will have to go and account for that as they're looking at their books. So, as I said, 4 is probably going to be the standard for a lot of companies. If you're looking at other companies which have done acquisitions, you might find yourself suddenly going from 2 systems to 6 systems very, very quickly. So it depends on the type of market which that firm or company would exist, but also if the company's an acquisition target or if it is growing at an exponential rate, the chances are that they will have to get these other systems in place. And you just really want that one source of tax truth, which is why a lot of different systems are coming around, which have to do calculation of taxes.
I'm wondering if you could tell us what exactly an indirect tax engine does. Where does it sit in terms of infrastructure, supply chain, and workflow, for example? Vince, could you help us with that?
Sure. So, if you look at an indirect tax engine, that typically sits as, I would call it, more of a back office tool. And all of your financial systems, be it an e-commerce system or a procurement system or an ERP, whatever it may be, they actually will send data in real time to that indirect tax engine. And what happens is it sends data to the engine. It's really transaction data that it's sending to the engine, so that the engine can figure out what the tax should be on that transaction and return that back into the source system so that it can be used to actually manage tax in real time as transactions are occurring in those systems. So it becomes a bit of a tax backbone, so to speak, that can be leveraged by all of the other systems that are either other back office systems or front office systems that are taking orders in real time from customers, as well as internal users.
David, anything to add or point out there?
Actually, Vince did a great job explaining all of that piece of it on there. But again, have what we typically see in infrastructure for the tax engine is a lot of different systems will be talking into one. So, or at least that's the best practice which we've seen out there from a lot of corporations as well. Why do you just have one tax engine? Because it's just easier to have it all in one place and keep that tax data consistent, especially the different rates and rules which might be getting applied.
The thing that David said there, and I'll chime in, David, if you don't mind, if it's really, really important, is having multiple systems, either front office or back office systems, interact with one tax engine allows organizations to centralize their tax approach, right? How they want tax to behave. And that way, tax can behave the same way in all of those various financial systems, even though they're different, right? So one might be SAP, another could be Hybris, another could be Ariba. These are all three very different systems that are doing different types of transactions, but you can make sure tax behaves the same way in all of those systems as long as you have one back office indirect tax engine managing all of those transactions. So that's from my mind, one of the real key benefits that you get when you automate tax with an indirect tax system.
David and Vince, we do live in the era of the hybrid cloud. Can an indirect tax engine be either in the cloud or on premise or perhaps even both?
Absolutely, yes, it can be.
It most certainly can be. And I think you're going to find that a hybrid deployment, right, where you have part of the application running locally really gives organizations flexibility to leverage the cloud in a way that still benefits their business and supports their business with the right level of flexibility. So there are certain applications where you can't actually afford any level of risk, right? Like you can never have downtime. It's so mission critical that you can't rely on the internet, right? And so and a hybrid deployment gives you those capabilities to have the cloud as your core processing, but you have localized deployments of a calc solution that connect up to that cloud, that sync with the cloud, but still can actually be deployed locally and sit side by side with your other financial systems to mitigate the risk of internet down. And then there are other scenarios where you just need a tremendous amount of performance in a really short period of time. For instance, if you're processing hundreds of millions of transactions in a few hours, that's another area where a hybrid cloud really gives you the flexibility to scale a solution to your unique business requirements while still getting the benefit of a connected cloud experience for the application overall. So there's definitely some what we're seeing is some industry movement towards hybrid solutions that preserve the benefits of the cloud but give that deployment flexibility.
Yeah. And I also think, Vince, as well, one of the areas just to kind of cover on here is, a lot of customers have been going through this journey, like which one of these platforms do they actually go through and pick, right? Everyone was rushing to SaaS to begin with because they wanted everything into the cloud. And that really is the model for a lot of companies. They want to shift the burden from managing and running infrastructure on premise into one which is scalable. And you only really get that scalability or fast scalability in the cloud. But since the CrowdStrike issue, which came up earlier on this year, we've seen a pullback or at least questioning from some of the CISOs or security officers or InfoSec saying, hey, have we really pushed everything into the cloud too much? Should we be looking at infrastructure which will allow us to have a bit more fault tolerant? So this has been a subject which has come up several times with some of the larger corporations. They've been really looking at their infrastructure to see what is the best that we can do. If we have things in the cloud, if the cloud goes out, we're out of service. We can't do anything at that point. You can then shift it if you do have a hybrid system to engines that can calculate taxes locally right next to the core systems that they need to do. But they have that advantage, right, of not having anything to go down on because they've got their systems up and running and the application's running locally. So they have a little bit more fault tolerance. And we've seen companies start to really leverage that. As Vince said, the advantage of having things locally is you don't have that long latency, which is great if you're running an e-commerce or an application that needs to have that that transaction to happen very quickly. So some of these larger organizations are actually looking to explore or move from just a pure SaaS play into one which is more hybrid, just with scalability. So we've seen that sort of pick up as well. But then you've also got your traditional customers moving from on-premise into cloud. We see a lot of that, but some of these larger ones also want to make sure that testing services are there as well. Why? Because they're used to doing that with on-premise before they roll out anything. So we see both of those customers really come towards Vertex.
Mhm. And it's all about flexibility at the end of the day. And a hybrid cloud deployment gives organizations additional deployment flexibility that they don't get with just a pure SaaS play.
I'd like to turn our attention to I think, an interesting result from the Market Pulse survey. 73% of those surveyed who have not deployed a cloud-based indirect tax engine have plans to do so. But interestingly, in this result, only 11% have already deployed an on-premise tax engine. I'm wondering, what do these findings tell us, Vince?
Hmm. It's interesting. I think if you look at it, the cloud is definitely the direction that organizations want to go. And I think our internal experience reflects that, as well as the survey that's been conducted, is that there's benefits to the cloud. There are actual operational benefits to the cloud. There's infrastructure benefits to the cloud. So I think organizations are definitely keen to move into the cloud. Um, when I look at it, though, I think you're going to find that while that's really very true for net new sales, people want to be in the cloud. I think for legacy organizations that have been on premise for a very long time, they're going to look at the cloud a little bit differently. And I think they're probably going to say the cloud is where we want to get to, but we do need to preserve some of the deployment flexibility that we've had in the past. And I think that's where having hybrid cloud deployment options really are going to complement that customer base and that particular customer profile very, very well. David, any thoughts from your perspective on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So within the market, Vince, we do see that there are a lot of on-premise customers which absolutely see the advantage of a cloud-based tax engine. But one of the biggest holdups for them, which we've seen out there as well, is when you shift away from having things on-premise into the cloud, you lose access to sometimes the database if you want to do direct access. query calls. We know that that happens, even though you should be running it through a structured query through the application. But then also control for testing and deployment of patches. We see that as a huge issue and something that our customers are speaking to us about all of the time. And you need to make sure that that is handled in the correct way, because when you move to the cloud, you really have to trust your vendor to have everything accurate inside that system, because most cloud-based services want to have a continual rollout rather than having a lot of structured service requests just to go through and basically upgrade the software. So we see that happening a lot. A lot of the on-premise customers love it, but it could also explain the results that you're seeing is, hey, look, only 11% have deployed out there. Well, they've only deployed out there because they've satisfied all of their internal requirements to move towards a cloud-based system, as opposed to still having it on an on-premise solution.
David, amidst the survey pointed to the top benefits of a cloud-based indirect tax engine, and those were kind of eye-opening as well. David, increased efficiency and automation example was in first place at 38%, access to new functionality, 37%. Really, there were quite a number of benefits. Maybe you could shed some light on those.
Yeah, absolutely. So, cloud-based systems, you're obviously going to get automation out from them. Why? Because you can actually do a lot more in our cloud solutions to go and help drive not just the tax calculation, but any ancillary services that are required afterwards. Remember, tax calc in the entire tax data journey is that first piece of the puzzle. You then have to do compliance and reporting, which comes out afterwards. So if you have systems that are all cloud-based and they can talk to each other, which usually happens a lot easier than setting up localized infrastructure, it enables you to do that entire tax data journey all the way through to filing and remittance with very little steps. If you want, you can automate a lot of this stuff as well. So that is definitely one of the most important pieces. But you've also got other things like ease of implementation and maintenance. Why is this easy? Well, I don't have to now worry about my underlying hardware, which is running my software. That can be run by someone else and scaled appropriately at any particular time. So that helped out. And then also for software maintenance, when you're in the cloud, one of the key benefits of it is that updates can happen automatically without you having to schedule time off, get your IT team involved to go and do these upgrades. So it is a huge advantage for a lot of companies. But again, going back to my previous answer, sometimes you need to make sure that everything is following your own internal process of the software releases. So, there's always that kind of, is this the right way to go or not? But you do get a huge amount of increased efficiency from moving towards the clouds. Secondly, on top of that, when you don't have to manage your own infrastructure or hardware, your cost savings go down. You're not having to buy expensive servers because you've now tapped out your existing infrastructure. So you get the cost savings of that. You're not having to do sporadic one-offs, because in the cloud, you can just scale up as you need, and you would pay for that service as well. And it typically is, you're not buying a whole server just to get 1% increase. You're able to scale that up sensibly. Not only that, when all of your data is in the cloud, you now can run massive reports. This has always been an issue with internal infrastructure. Yeah, it's great creating the data and getting it in, but analyzing and processing that data once it becomes, anything from tens of million records into hundreds of million records becomes a much bigger task and complication. So having that all in the cloud, having software which is appropriately scaled in the cloud, you would absolutely get huge advantages from doing that. And not only that, when it's inside the cloud, you can set things up to be global super quickly. You don't have to worry about setting up infrastructure in Europe, in Asia Pac, or even in the US. That can be handled either centrally, or you can go and deploy your cloud to those particular regions to go and do that calculations, but have them all tie back into one particular system. So there's a lot of advantages. I kind of covered a couple of extra ones. Ease of implementation, you get some cost savings, you definitely have more powerful data management, and then you also have global scalability.
Vince, David covered a lot of territory there. Anything to add?
Well, I think David did cover in the terrible there, and it's all accurate, all correct. The only thing I would drive into a little bit further is, really when you look at the cloud, you look at the hybrid cloud, you're getting a lot of flexibility, a lot of optionality in terms of how you want to take advantage of the cloud. And that kind of, I think, acts as a little bit more than the sum of its parts, right? So when you add that into a lot of the other core efficiencies that you get with an indirect tax solution, like the tax automation, the centralization of how you want tax to behave in one place, and how that then trickles out to all of your other systems to ensure tax consistency on every transaction. That automatic update of the rates and rules every single month to keep you compliant, blended with all of the deployment flexibility you get with a hybrid cloud, where you can take some of the calc infrastructure and run it locally. Other parts of it can run naturally in our public cloud infrastructure. I think when you look at it there, we really are setting customers up, setting organizations up for real success in the indirect tax space.
Well, I'd like to point to a significant finding from the Market Pulse report, and that's that users of cloud-based third-party indirect tax engines find it easier to achieve consistent tax treatment than those who are not cloud-based. Uh, Vince, what do you think is behind that? Why is it so important?
So I think part of it, when it's cloud-based versus not cloud-based, is because a cloud-based system you don't have to manage the infrastructure for. Right? When you're not cloud-based, when you're doing things on your own premises, you're going to need to have multiple deployments of the same software. There's going to have to be scalability and redundancy baked in, and that opens the door for automation problems. And the whole benefit of an indirect tax solution is that it's a highly automated tool. And when you start chipping away at that automation factor, and you start reducing that, it becomes more cumbersome to manage, and I think it opens the door for human error in a lot of places. So when you take something that is naturally complex like tax, and then you add human error on top of it, and you add deployment complexity on top of it, and you add management complexity on top of it, and you start to really expand the scope of problem areas in a big way, versus when you shift something that's complex into a cloud and you have an organization whose entire life and purpose, which is what Vertex is, our entire life and purpose is indirect tax management. And you take that and you allow that type of organization to manage it. A lot of the things that can go wrong that add to complexity instead of remove from complexity are eliminated, because people that live and breathe and manage indirect tax complexity all day, every day, are then operationally managing the deployment of the software and the deployment of the solution in a very managed cloud. And that's why I would say that when you look at SaaS versus non-SaaS deployments of a calc engine or a calc solution, you end up with better results with the SaaS-based deployment. It's because people that live and breathe and manage indirect tax all day and every day are actually also managing the cloud infrastructure for it.
Agree, David?
Oh, absolutely. And I just wanted to enhance one of Vince's really great points on here. So, what are the alternatives, right, of a SaaS system? It will be non-SaaS. It will be the traditional you install your software. Well, just think someone from tax would have to go into every single one of those core systems. And as we talked earlier, they could be at minimum four, but it could be up to 8 systems, and ensure that tax is treated exactly the same in every single one of those systems. So even if they weren't using Vertex, they were using other tax-based solutions, either a raw table or something else. Someone has to maintain that and ensure that every single one of those tax systems does it consistently. When you've got a SaaS-based solution, you now have one tax system to rule them all effectively. So even for someone's job, it's a lot easier to go in and update one system and have that reflected in any other application that uses it, as opposed to going into every single other application and updating those tax rules. Now, on some of them, which are simple to do, it could be very easy to get done within a day, but the chances are it's probably going to take several weeks to go and update every single system if you have a non-SaaS based solution where all of these other systems are talking to independent tax engines. Not only that, a lot of the older legacy systems which are out there were never really adapted to do, as much in terms of commerce as we do today. Obviously, e-com is a huge play which is out there currently today. And as such, they've had to bake in legacy code into some of these systems to handle tax outside of its normal or normal window within that system. So these can cause some of these other issues which come out later about tax treatment not being the same in different systems. We've seen that when we've dealt with customers in the past, which have said to us, hey, look, these results look like they're incorrect. Further analysis showed that it was one system which was custom code, or one system that didn't have the right rates which were applied to it at that particular time. So we do see it. You will get better tax consistency if you've got that one tax system that feeds the data out to every single other system, which requires that sort of tax calc. Oh, and then you add the other stuff like M&A and acquisitions. This will again make that even more difficult to go through and do. So having a common system that other people can call into, especially for M&A activities, make sure that your tax is going to be consistent. Because again, consistency is important here. The worst thing is if you're doing certain things in one system, another in the other. When you try and reconcile that to do your compliance reporting, it's just going to be a nightmare to go and find out which core system was doing that correctly.
David and Vince, let's turn our attention to the Vertex O series, if we might. How does the O series achieve consistent tax treatment? And can it do this whether on premises, in the cloud, or in a hybrid environment?
So O Series is Vertex's flagship tax solution in terms of tax determination. And I think if you look at it, what O Series does really, really well is it has all sorts of content in it for sales and use tax, consumers use tax, lodging and occupancy, telecommunications content, value added tax, so you can manage tax globally. We have Brazil content. Basically all of our content is powered by this one engine. So this is, in my opinion, one of the first and most important aspects of O Series is we have one engine that can drive 100% of the Vertex content. And so you're able to centralize all of that automated rate and rule logic in one tool set. Then on top of that, it has a tremendous amount of flexibility just in the core software. So you can adapt how O Series behaves to your unique business environment. If you need to change how O Series processes something or add any type of additional logic to the product, you can completely adapt how O Series behaves to your business. And one of the things that really achieves at the end of the day is it doesn't matter where you're selling, who you're selling to, or where you're buying and who you're buying from, or even what you're selling or buying. You'll be able to use O Series to manage the tax on that transaction because it's flexible, it's robust, and it has global content in it. So this is, if I look at O Series as a whole, this is where it shines and why it shines. It's one of the reasons it's used by so many of the Fortune 500 organizations in the world, because it is able to deliver that level of scale and flexibility. And then when you start taking O Series and you're looking at how it deploys, we're able to give a tremendous amount of deployment flexibility to our customers to support the unique infrastructure requirements they may have. You may have clients that still want to run behind their own firewall 100%, nothing in the cloud. And we have solutions for O Series that can deploy it like that. But then for organizations that are looking to move into the cloud, we have our O Series software deployed as a SaaS application in both public and private cloud offerings to really adapt to the needs of our customers. And then if you're looking for something even more flexible than that, there's the hybrid cloud, where you can take our edge deployment of O Series and run that locally behind the firewall, but it syncs up with the cloud. So effectively, you're getting the benefit of the cloud, which is that one central cloud-hosted version of O Series that's fully managed and fully orchestrated by our infrastructure team. But you could deploy local copies of that cloud O Series down to your own infrastructure to manage tax locally where it's needed. But why that works so well is it's synced up with that single O Series instance in the cloud. So a lot of the pitfalls that you can run into when you're leveraging local deployments of anything, which is keeping it up to date, keeping it accurate, keeping it running well, all of that goes away because of how our hybrid cloud deployments work. And effectively, all of those local deployments of O Series in those local containers sync up back into our cloud. So it eliminates some of the key risk points of deploying local software in what we call our hybrid cloud approach. So that's, from my perspective, why where I'd say O Series really shines and really delivers some meaningful value in the cloud and just in general.
David, Vince covered a lot of ground there. Anything to add?
I don't think, because I'll be redundant at this point, because he covered all of the main topics, which are, look, O Series can be deployed in many different ways. You can either have our edge-based technology, which is still an O Series engine under that hood, along with our basically our hybrid, our on-premise, or our pure SaaS-based solution as well. So we do have that flexibility. One other small point to talk upon is with Vertex and O Series, we actually do have the ability to be multi-cloud with those solutions. So if you prefer to be running on Azure or OCI or AWS, we're able to offer those options within our solution, because O Series is configured to basically handle those particular deployment platforms.
David, to follow up just a bit, can you tell us about how some customers are putting this to work?
Absolutely. So we kind of talked about infrastructure earlier. So at its core, O Series is going to be one of the most central pieces to any of the ERP integrations which are happening. You're always going to need to calculate tax. So we kind of do best practice of, hey, look, if your solution is in the cloud, and again, you have multiple different deployments which are there, we will work with the customer to find out exactly which one's going to, be the best benefit for them. If, it really depends on the customer's business model of what they're going in today, depending on how they deploy out with Vertex. We covered a couple of points earlier between transactions. If you are a large e-com retailer and you're getting continuous transactions happen, and then suddenly on, Black Friday and Cyber Monday, those numbers spike to 8, 10x of what you would typically be doing, we would work with the solution of the Vertex O Series and deploy that out with you. Now, for those customers, we might find out that, hey, look, SaaS is absolutely fine because you don't do anything more than 30 million transactions, even at the most busiest time within a day. That sort of is, those sort of numbers are very standard for our solutions. Alternatively, if we find out you're doing billions of, transactions in a particular day, we might, look at your entire stack and what you're doing and just say, hey, look, hybrid's going to be the most reasonable for you. Why? You need that flexibility to scale up those edge nodes way faster than you do for processing and running your reports later on. So there are different methodologies or different, deployment options that we would take with customers. We just have to sit down with them and really do that discovery with them to find out which one's going to be best. So in a nutshell, it's always, I would say 80% of customers absolutely will be doing SaaS, but which SaaS deployment will depend on their use cases. And that really is what we see across the board. Vince, did you have anything from your end?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there, David, to be honest. The only thing I would add to it is that as we work with customers, we actually work with them very consultatively to try to figure out what makes the most sense for their business. And that's where we're in a unique position where we have a lot of options that we can work with a customer on to adapt how we deploy the software to the customer's business, how we think about the solution overall with the customer. So we try to be very consultative, I would say, in terms of making sure that we pair the right technology and the right deployment methodology to support the goals that our customers have.
Well, turning our attention to yet another interesting survey result, respondents say that a positive industry reputation is the most important factor when choosing an indirect tax engine. I suppose that's not surprising, since tax compliance is one area where you don't want to take any unnecessary risks. But David and Vince, what is your take on this research finding?
I would agree with it. I think you want to know that you're doing business with a reputable organization, with somebody that knows how actually tax works, with somebody that has a lot of history in the space. And I think part of the reason is, if you do tax wrong, it can have some serious consequences for an organization in terms of audit liability. So the brand and the reputation that you have usually comes from the results that you produce for organizations. And I would say it's really important that organizations take tax seriously. Vertex does, and we have a strong brand in the industry because we take tax so seriously. And it's one of those areas you can't afford to be wrong on.
Excellent. And just to kind of follow up with what Vince was saying, trust is everything within compliance and even for taxation. So, we always expect everything to go right, but similarly speaking, when things go wrong, you want to make sure you have the right service, which is there, the right reputation of company, which will go there and work with you to go and get things fixed when they fail. Something's always going to go wrong. And it would be I would say very dishonest of me to say everything is 100% perfect all of the time. But having that support, what Vertex has got HDI certified support, which is a huge thing for the industry. It shows that we follow the processes that enable customers to go and get the right treatment from Vertex if things do go wrong. And we have a very, very set list of goals that we strive to accomplish there in terms of SLAs for getting any of these things fixed for our customers. We are always trying to get them all up all of the time, I should say, with their solution in case there are any issues which they might have with tax treatments. But this is why you need to trust a company which has that reputation there. If you're not doing all of the, I guess, the important work for testing, you're doing all of the important work for ensuring these things are working with customers. If anything fails, that is a ding on your brand and reputation. And within this market, that will go out pretty quickly, which is why, to Vince's point, we have always treated our brand as the number one. Trust is a part of that, and it's pretty much the most important thing that we have on there.
Well, we are nearing the end of our time, but before we close, what are the key points that members of our audience should remember? David, perhaps you'd like to go first.
Oh, absolutely. So just wanted to reinforce, depending on how your solution is, you should absolutely get a tax engine. So if you're still using the native functionality today from your ERP, that might be doing you pretty well if you're only in one state or a couple of states where it's pretty easy to calculate. But you will eventually have to get a tax engine. It will solve a lot of the problems of making sure that tax is treated exactly the same across multiple systems. It's just a better system to have. Not only that, when you do get your tax engine, ensure that it's deployed to cloud. A lot of systems interconnect with our solution. We have a bunch of connectors to various different systems, whether it's procurement, ERP, or even e-com related. The great thing about having that is we've got those pre-built connectors, which you can go and add and then start utilizing Vertex very, very quickly afterwards without having to deploy out your own custom code or custom integrations. And then the last one, again, when you're doing all of these things, is just choose a vendor that you absolutely trust and you like their reputation. Sometimes slowing down and asking the right questions saves you a lot of money later on than just rushing, getting in a tax system that looks cheap, and then finding the issues out later on. So that would be my recommendation back.
Vince, key takeaways?
From my point of view, I think I would echo everything David said. And I would actually also, though, really reinforce the benefits of automation. So when you're looking at an indirect tax solution, you really want to take away as much of the manual effort for tax management as you can. And so you should be working with a partner that you believe is going to actually help eliminate as much of those manual day-to-day activities that are required for rate and rule management of tax as you can. And part of that is really making sure that you're getting the right content, that those content updates are coming out consistently and frequently, and that it's integrated into the right back office systems and front office systems to support that tax automation. So, from my point of view, I would definitely encourage customers or organizations that are looking at automating tax to really keep that in mind. Make sure it's automated. Make sure it's automated in all of the systems that need to touch tax, and make sure that you're getting the content that you need to support the tax management of what you're selling and buying.
Well, that's great information and certainly good advice, David and Vince. Thanks so much. Well, that is all the time we have in this video on-demand webcast. Sincere thanks once again to David Reed and Vince Marasco of Vertex for shedding light on those Market Pulse survey results and for explaining the need for a trusted indirect tax engine and how a cloud-based solution like that of Vertex can meet the needs of organizations worldwide. As I mentioned before, you can find more information on how a cloud-based indirect tax engine can help your organization. Just take a look in the resources area on your screen. And thanks for joining us. For Vertex and CIO, I'm Stan Gibson.